Raising the minimum wage. In recent years, it has become a very widely and fervently proposed solution to raising standards of living for Americans as well as reducing poverty. On the surface, it sounds like a good idea, but such a drastic economic policy really requires deeper logical reasoning and economic reasoning, not just emotions and passions. Jack Kelly, who's a senior job recruiter, writes this in Forbes magazine. He says that it's noble and commendable to want to raise the minimum wage, but many of the arguments rely on raw emotions, and there's ramifications to raising the minimum wage. And that's my goal, is to persuade you that raising the minimum wage has negative consequences, and it is not a solution to increasing the economic prosperity of Americans. So, first off, the negative consequences. Businesses on the whole will be negatively affected by raising the minimum wage, small and large businesses alike. Small businesses may be more disproportionately hurt because they're less easily able to bite the bullet of having to pay their employees more. Now, small businesses that are struggling to stay afloat, what happens if you raise the minimum wage? They may cut employee hours, lay off employees, raise the prices of their goods and services, anything they can do to stay afloat, to keep the doors open. So they're going to be hurt. Large businesses will be hurt as well. Large businesses may not be able to reinvest into their company to improve productivity. Large businesses may opt to just go to automated systems. Instead of paying all these employees, $15 an hour, they may just go automated and cut the workforce completely. New businesses may be prevented from even coming into existence because now with this larger threshold that they have to pay their employees, they may not be able to afford it. So on the whole, this whole issue can really be understood using the basic economic law of supply and demand. Here's a supply and demand curve. On the y-axis is price of a good, the x-axis is quantity of the good. Supply curve goes upward, demand curve goes downward. The law of demand states that at a higher price, buyers demand less of a good. The price is the wage, the buyer is the employee, or the employer, excuse me. So at a higher price the employer has to pay, they're going to demand less employees. $15 an hour, if it's increased, they're not going to be able to afford. So they're not going to demand more employees at a higher price. The law of supply states that at a higher price, suppliers will supply more of a good. The price is the wage. The supplier of the good is the employee itself. So they're supplying their labor, they're supplying their work. So if it's a higher potential wage, potential employees will want those jobs. They're going to flood the marketplace. You couple this together, the employer is going to want less employees. The employee is going to want that $15 an hour, so there's going to be more competition. Well, what the employer is going to do, he's going to have to pay his employees more, so he's going to have more value on those employees. He's not going to want to hire a lower experienced, lower educated, younger worker. He's going to want somebody that he can really trust and that he's trust that is worth that $15 an hour. So what it's going to do is it's going to exclude a lot of people from the available jobs. And liberal and conservative economists have always agreed on this. Matter of fact, Charles Blahaus, who has worked for both the Obama and Bush administrations, writes this. He writes in the Hoover Digest, raising the minimum wage comes with a price, and it's mainly to exclude younger, less experienced workers from the marketplace, from jobs. Max Ehrenfraud, who is a historian, writes about this as well. He writes in the Washington Post, what it's going to do, raising the minimum wage, it's going to remove that bottom rung of the ladder. So lower experienced, less educated employees will be more negatively affected. Now, there is empirical evidence to show this as well. It's not just the supply and demand. Seattle has raised their minimum wage, the city of Seattle, and there was a study done. It's a 57-page study commissioned by the Seattle City Hall and the University of Washington. What the study showed ultimately, that the increased wages had an effect by reductions in employment and hours. So it was offset. Employees were paid more, but there was less hours offered and people were laid off, less new hires. Funny story, I guess you could say it's funny. Bernie Sanders, in his last campaign, big proponent of $15 minimum wage. Well, he actually wasn't paying his staffers and his employees $15 an hour. He was called out on this. He ceded and raised the wages of his employees. Well, Mark Tyson actually noted this in the Washington Post. What happened with Bernie Sanders is, and as Mark Tyson reported, he actually cut the average hours of his employees from 60 hours to 43 hours. Proof positive right there. You can be a proponent and have the emotional attachment and the passion for minimum wage, a higher minimum wage, but in reality, economics, are pretty, there's laws to economics that'll prevent that from happening. So you have to really analyze that. The solution to increasing economic prosperity will not be accomplished with raising the minimum wage. Matter of fact, the minimum wage is simply in response to inflation. The minimum wage has been raised dozens of times since the 1930s, and it's in response to inflation. Historian and economic analyst Alex McIntyre notes this in Bloomberg. He says the current $7.25 minimum wage is 16% less than when it was enacted in 2009, and that's because of inflation. The price of goods and services rise, and minimum wage tries to rise as well to keep up with that. So the solution is tackling the inflation, which can be accomplished by looking at government spending and our monetary policy, printing of money. So, no, the solution to raising economic prosperity is not raising the minimum wage. Matter of fact, raising the minimum wage will negatively impact businesses, employees, and even us consumers as well. Minimum wage is not a solution. The solution needs to be more comprehensive and systemic. We need to look at inflation and our monetary system.